Okay, so part two, who am I? When Paul is sharing with people, a gathering of people in Athens in Acts chapter 17, he quotes their philosophers and their poets, and he says, we are his offspring. We are the offspring of the God that Paul was talking about. In Genesis, God says that we are made in his image. That word Selem is actually, it is ancient temple language, where a translation of Selem or image can be idol. That who we are is an idol of God. What that actually means is the language that is used in Genesis is painting a picture that as God creates this garden, he is creating a temple. And at the center of the temple, in ancient Near East temples, they would have placed an idol or a representation of that God in the center of the temple. And what does God do? He places Adam right in the center of the garden. His image bearer is placed in the center to be his representation. And when he gives his commissioning to Adam and Eve, he says, I want you to rule and reign, to have dominion over the earth. This is a high calling and a high purpose for humanity, that we are God's representation. It takes a lot of trust. God trusts us to be his representation. He believes in us to be his image bearers. It speaks a lot into what and who we are. And so as the story of the Bible continues, we then come to Exodus, which I believe in Exodus 20 is one of the most misunderstood verses. Because in Exodus chapter 20, verse 7, it says, do not take the Lord your God's name in vain, or do not misuse his name. And if you're anything like me in my upbringing, there was a jar in our house. And every time you took the Lord's name in vain, you had to put money in this jar, where you would use his name as a curse, or you would utter his name almost as a frustration. I don't actually think this is all that this verse is saying, and many scholars would agree that actually the true representation in this verse was actually speaking to us, his image bearers. And you see this best as the story of Exodus continues, where Aaron the high priest enters into the temple. Not only does he wear the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, but also scribed on his forehead on a golden plate is the name Yahweh. That Aaron literally, as the high priest, carries the name of the Lord into the temple, carries the name of God. And so in Deuteronomy, when God is speaking to the people, and he makes a proclamation and declaration over the people that they are his chosen people, a holy nation. That is priestly language, that suddenly not only Aaron is the high priest, all this nation becomes the representation of God. That all of this nation carry the name of Yahweh on them. And so to take the name of God in vain is to misuse who he is in who we are. Is to misrepresent him. It's so much bigger than just saying his name as a curse. It's so much bigger than just being frustrated and saying Jesus or God. It is actually saying, I am not representing the God who has made me in his image. It is such a high calling and so purpose-filled in our lives. It's something that we wrestle out, not as a condemning way, but as an invitation that our lives are etched with purpose. That it's unfathomable to think that in God's design, that he ever would have intended for people to be lower than others, for people to experience discrimination, for people to be rejected from society, to be isolated. That was never in his design. So as we wrestle through this has to be our starting point. As I chat with Andrew and Jill, this is our starting point when we try to understand who am I in the midst of God's design. Okay, part two. So this is brilliant. This creates different feelings for both of you. But when you think of being made in the image of God, or when you think of carrying the name of Yahweh, carrying the Lord's name, what does that bring up in you two?
Well, for me, it brings up opportunity. I think when we talk about being made in the image of God, for me, I go to that means value. God has placed his value in us. God is the ultimate valuable one. He is priceless. You can't put a cost on him, a price on him. He's ultimately the most valuable being of all. He's everything, the source of everything. And then he then gives value to us.
Right.
So we then become his representatives. We then become his image carriers. It's just this unbelievable opportunity. It's an unbelievable honor to be blessed to carry the image of the one who designed us and created us. Even in the culture and context of the time, where the other creation stories are doing the rounds in those cultures and in those places, it was always about the gods choosing kings or leaders to rule over the people on behalf of the gods. It was all like this work-based system. It was structured and hierarchical. And here we have this divine beauty, imparting that to humanity as a whole. So valuing everybody as a representative of the God, not a layer above, like kings sort of representing the God, or pharaohs, as we would also talk about in the Egypt context. But you and I, male and female, all made in his image. I mean, it was a radical story. It was a countercultural creation narrative. So to be made in the image of the divine, as a humanity, as a people, both male and female, wow, and to get to carry his image and likeness, his Salem and Demuth.
So we're going to come back to the value piece, because that's key.
Yep.
Right. So you hear opportunity. When you initially hear it, you hear something slightly different, which is...
Well, when I listen to this, I'm going, yes, like value and worth. Like that resonates to me. This is why you need to be in community with the people who remind you of the things, right? For sure. But initially, I just feel the responsibility of that.
Right.
The weight of that. Even if you've watched the first video, the idea that I had maybe a slightly incorrect view of what God was like. Right, and how it sends me down this certain path. I think that I just always feel the weight of like, oh my goodness, do I bear him well? If I carry this image, am I representing him well? So see, like you've put in there, we were made to be the representation of God. That feels weighty to me, right? But yet I understand. I totally understand that, like what value he has placed in us to trust us with his image. But oh my God, I really do feel the weight of that, because I don't want to be an awful caricature drawing of him.
Right.
I want people to like look and go, I see him. Like I see the God of love. Like if I start behaving in a way that's like harsh, judgmental, whatever, and because people know I'm a Christian, well, that must be what God's like. That's technically what this is saying. So it just makes me really aware of my actions and who I am in a room to people. If I'm representing, am I representing well? And I feel the weight of that.
Well, it isn't, as long as we can do those questions where it doesn't lead us down a dark path where we avoid, it's a good question to be asking of like, how am I representing him? They're good self-reflective questions, but as long as they don't lead you away.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it can paralyze you. You'll never do anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where like God is wanting you to go and But
it links us into the first one. So once we know who he is, then we know who we are made to be like.
Right.
And so the more we get to know him, it actually informs who we are.
Right.
As we are made by the Creator. We're created in his image. Therefore, the more we get to know the one who created us, the more then we will become like him. So rather than it leading us into a place where we're, oh no, am I? Actually, the invitation is here, well, come and see and get to know me, and then you'll discover more about who you're meant to be, who you're created to be.
Right.
I suppose in so many ways that my discipleship journey has been probably one of being more secure in my own skin. If that revelation of like God loves me as I am, well, actually, I've got to start loving me as I am. Maybe I'm not doing as terrible a job as I think I am.
Right.
You know, because like he's this father who adores me.
Right.
So be less hard on myself and others.
Well, so you guys have said two things about the image of God. You said value, and you said the trust that he's given to us to represent them. Let's talk about that a little bit, right? So you said he has made all people in his image, therefore all people have value. That vision of humanity, that radically changes if we carry that, which I know most of us would all say we do, but if we really carry that, it completely changes our world.
Yeah, it's like putting on a pair of polarized lenses, sunglasses. All of a sudden, everything changes. But you have to make a conscious decision to put on those glasses and see the world through the lens that God invites us into seeing. So suddenly, whenever you see everybody's made in His image, then that changes how you see and treat people. It actually, I genuinely believe that as our lens, as we see this world, removes so many of the issues that we see have risen up and presented themselves as such big issues in these last in this last decade or so. This heightened awareness of racial tension. All of a sudden, when we put our God image lens on, then we see an equality and a God image in each of us, regardless of race and ethnicity, which actually means that we treat with value and dignity and honour. That actually eradicates so many of the issues that we have between male and female, the tension that has risen in that space. So many of these things, once the image of God is the first thing that we see in one another and the lens in which we view, everything else falls into place in line with God's vision. Yeah. Again, who is He? And we take our order from there.
Right. I mean, that's a radical humanity.
It is, right? It's God's radical vision for humanity.
And if we are to be His representations, then we seek to live that out and see that out. Thank you for that, because value then and trust, like that
it's
really
hand in hand.
Wow, absolutely, that sticks out to me, like a God who believes in us, right? Like
and I want to say that shows up again in Jesus. Mm-hmm. So when Jesus then says to these guys, "Come and follow me." The inference in the language that He uses and in the phraseology means this: come and follow me because I believe you can. I know that you can do this. So in that sense, I know you can represent me. Right. I know you can be like me, because that's the whole thing about following after a rabbi. I know you can be like me. I believe that you can be like me. And we see that in the creation mandate. I'm creating you to be like me.
Right. Which is great for somebody who sees the responsibility of that.
Yeah.
Right, we can represent Him, we can be made, and we can represent Him to the world, which is huge. I think it's really important to end this one here, because your story, even in this, where a poor representation of who He is can have a really damaging impact on people, right? Mm-hmm. So you didn't necessarily experience a good representation of, and it took you a while to come back to church or whatever and things like that. So we really need to not figure out how to represent well, but we have to go after this. We've got to keep aligning ourselves with His image, right? How do we do that? Like how would you say or help somebody represent or live out the image of God in their lives? What would you say to them?
I always think there's so much truth in that kind of phrase, you are who you hang around.
Right.
Right. So if we're wanting to become like God, we need to be hanging around Him.
Right.
It's back to that, like, who is He? And a relational encounter. And you become like the people you hang around. You even think like people dress the same, look the same. It just is a natural thing that we project our company. And so for someone pursuing, I guess, that idea of like living out the God story, we've got to be in it.
Right.
Like steeped in it.
Right.
Being around the other people who are in it. Right. Rubbing shoulders with the right people and becoming more and more like God that we can. Be my advice.
That's great. Anything you add?
Yeah, I think again, a broadening understanding of where God is, how you can experience Him, how can I become more like Him, and even reading, this morning, God, who had at various times and in different ways spoke through the prophets, and in these days has spoken to us through His Son, the express image, and so this deep journeying into what does it look like for Jesus to be present in my life, for His Holy Spirit to be in me, shaping and forming me in His likeness? A constant awareness of the God who dwells in me, who is living in this temple, and how would Jesus act, speak, think, carry Himself in this moment? Who would He seek out? Who would He want to be seen with? Who does He give His time to? All of those things are the filter then that becomes our way of being and living.
I'm glad you mentioned the community piece, because that then is going to bring us into our next part here, where we're going to talk about who are we. But thank you guys for that. Thank you for sharing that as we continue on looking at identity.